She thought she had buried me along with my son. She was wrong. My name is not important. What is important is this. I am 60, 3 years old. I spent 31 years building a plumbing supply company from a single truck and a phone book. And on a Tuesday morning in October, I stood outside my own son's house with a garbage bag holding everything I owned, while my daughter-in-law watched from the doorway with a smile I will never forget for the rest of my life. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense unless you understand who my son was. My son's name was Daniel. He was 37 years old when he died. He had my mother's eyes and his grandfather's laugh, and he could fix anything with his hands, a broken engine, a cracked foundation, a friendship that had gone cold. He was the kind of man who remembered your coffee order and asked about your sick dog by name. I raised him alone after his mother passed when he was 9, and I am not ashamed to say that he was the best thing I ever did with my life. He met his wife, I will call her Renee, at a charity auction 7 years ago. She was beautiful in the way that certain things are beautiful before you understand what they cost. She had a wide smile and a soft voice, and she said all the right things to all the right people. I liked her at first. I want to be honest about that. I shook her hand at that first dinner and thought, my son chose well. I should have paid more attention to what she ordered that night. She sent the steak back twice. They married 18 months after they met. I paid for the wedding because Daniel asked me to, and because I loved my son, and because I believed at that point that Renee loved him too. It was a beautiful ceremony. 212 people, a band, a chocolate fountain that my granddaughter, my daughter's girl, visiting from Portland, stuck her entire fist into. The first year was fine. The second year, things began to shift in ways I could not name yet. Daniel called less. When I visited, Renee was always in the room, always pleasant, always somehow redirecting the conversation. She started referring to the company, my company, the one I had built as the family business, which I suppose it was, except that I had never offered her a seat at the table. In the 3rd year of their marriage, Daniel came to see me alone. It was a Sunday. He sat at my kitchen table the way he used to sit when he was 12 and had broken something, and he told me that Renee had suggested they look into adding her name to the property deed. Their house. The house I had purchased for them as a wedding gift. I told him I needed to think about it. He nodded. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. 2 weeks later, he was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition that attacked his heart. The doctors were careful and serious, and used words I had to write down to look up later. The prognosis was not good, but it was not immediate. He had time, they said. Possibly years. Renee cried in the hospital waiting room. She held my arm. I remember thinking, this is real what she feels. I gave her the benefit of every doubt I had left. I should have kept those doubts. In the months that followed, I watched my son fight with everything he had. He changed his diet. He did the physical therapy. He kept going to the office 3 days a week because he said the work kept him feeling like himself. And I came every Sunday without fail. I brought groceries. I fixed the gutters. I sat with him on the back porch and we drank decaf coffee because that was all his cardiologist would allow, and we talked about baseball and old trucks, and the summer we drove Route 66 when he was 16. What I did not know during those Sundays was that Renee had already begun making plans. I found this out later, piece by piece, the way you find out most terrible things. Not all at once, but in slow, nauseating increments. Daniel died on a Wednesday in October. He was at home. I was there. Renee was there. He was not in pain at the end, and I am grateful for that above almost everything else. I held his hand, and I told him what I have always believed, that he had been good, and that being good was enough, and that his mother would be glad to see him. I stayed at the house that night. Of course I did. I had nowhere to be, and I could not have driven anyway. The funeral was 4 days later. I helped plan it. I chose the music. Daniel had loved a specific Johnny Cash album, the one recorded live at Folsom Prison, and we played 3 songs from it. The church was full. His friends from college came. His employees came. Neighbors I hadn't seen in years came. Renee wore a black dress that I later learned cost $800. She stood next to me during the reception and accepted condolences with the posture of a woman who had rehearsed the afternoon. There was a man at the funeral I did not recognize. Tall, younger than Daniel. He stood near the back, and he left before the reception ended. I noticed him because he looked at Renee in a way that people look at someone they know in private. I filed that away. I was grieving. I had no vocabulary yet for what I was noticing. 9 days after the funeral, Renee asked me to come to the house. She said there were things of Daniel's she thought I should have. I drove over. I brought a casserole because that is what I do. I feed people when I don't know what else to offer. She did not take the casserole. She left it on the counter and walked me into the living room and told me, standing in front of Daniel's own bookshelves, that she would need me to return my key to the house. I thought I had misunderstood her. I had not. She said the house was hers now. She said the estate was being handled by her attorney. She said she appreciated everything I had done for Daniel over the years, but that she needed space to grieve and to move forward, and that it would be best if I contacted her through her lawyer going forward. I sat there for what felt like a long time. The casserole was on the counter. The Johnny Cash record I had given Daniel for his birthday was on the shelf 3 feet from my left shoulder. I said, "Renee, I bought this house." She said she was aware of that, and that it had been a gift. I said, "There are things of Daniel's here, his grandfather's tools, the model trains he built when he was a teenager. She said her attorney would be in touch regarding personal property. I gave her the key. I am still not sure why. I think I was in shock. I think I kept expecting to wake up, or for her expression to change, or for something in the room to indicate that this was not actually happening. I drove home with an empty casserole dish, and I sat in my kitchen until dark. Her attorney called 2 days later. A smooth, efficient voice. He informed me that Renee was the sole beneficiary of Daniel's estate, as per the most recent will, dated 14 months prior, and that any items I believed were mine by right could be claimed through proper legal channels. He used the phrase proper legal channels twice. He was very calm. I understood, listening to him, that this call had been made many times before. I hung up and I called my own attorney, a man named Gerald, who had handled my business contracts for 20 years, and who, when I explained the situation, said 4 words I had not expected. "Did Daniel have a safe?" I told him I didn't know. Gerald said, "Think. Did he ever mention a safe? A lockbox? Anywhere he kept documents?" And then I remembered something. About 2 years before Daniel died, when I had come over to help him replace the water heater in the garage, I had noticed a seam in the floor that didn't match the concrete around it. I had asked Daniel about it. He had changed the subject with a speed that I'd registered and then forgotten. I told Gerald about the seam. He said, "That house is in her name now. But if there are documents in that house that belong to you, or that were intended for you, we may have options. Don't go there alone. Don't contact Renee. Let me make some calls." I did not sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold, and I thought about my son. I thought about the 14-month-old Will. I thought about the man at the back of the church. I thought about the way Renee had stood at the funeral with the posture of a woman who had rehearsed the afternoon. Gerald called me the next morning with news that rearranged my understanding of the past 2 years entirely. A private investigator he occasionally worked with had been asked, as a favor, to run a background check on Renee's name and the names of anyone connected to her. It took less than 48 hours. The tall man from the funeral, I will call him Marcus, had a prior relationship with Renee that predated her meeting my son by at least 3 years. They had lived together briefly in Phoenix. He had a civil judgment against him for fraud involving a real estate investment scheme. Small scale, but a pattern. I sat with that information for a long time. Renee had not stumbled into my son's life at a charity auction. She had walked in with a plan. Gerald filed a request for an independent accounting of the estate. He also contacted a colleague who specialized in probate and elder law, a woman named Patricia, who had what she called a very particular interest in cases involving vulnerable testators. I did not fully understand what that phrase meant until she explained it to me. A vulnerable testator is someone who, due to illness or medication or emotional dependency, may not have been fully capable of executing a valid will. Daniel had been on significant cardiac medications for the 14 months leading up to the will being signed. Patricia said, "I'm not promising anything, but I want to see that will." Gerald filed to contest. Renee's attorney responded within 24 hours. The response was aggressive in the way that only responses to things that threaten real money tend to be. There were letters. There were accusations. There was a phone call from Renee herself, the first time she had contacted me directly since she'd taken my key, in which she told me, in a voice I had not heard from her before, low and without the soft edges, that I was embarrassing myself and that Daniel would be ashamed of what I was doing. I let her finish. Then I said, Daniel kept a safe in the garage floor. I'd like to know what's in it. The line was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted. She hung up. Gerald told me the next morning that Renee had hired a contractor to renovate the garage. We filed for an emergency injunction to halt any construction pending the probate proceedings. The judge granted it. I don't know what Renee's attorney said to her when he called with that news, but I know what I did. I went to the grocery store, bought a rotisserie chicken, and ate dinner for the first time in a week. The discovery process took 3 months. 3 months of documents and depositions and Patricia asking questions in rooms where Renee's attorney objected constantly and Patricia continued asking anyway. I was deposed twice. I told the truth both times. I have found, in 63 years, that the truth is the only story you can keep straight across 2 separate depositions. What came out of those 3 months was this. The will Renee had submitted, the one naming her sole beneficiary, had been signed at a period when Daniel's cardiologist had doubled his anti-rejection medication. His medical records showed 3 documented episodes of confusion in the weeks surrounding the signing. One of the witnesses to the will was an acquaintance of Marcus. Patricia called this a thread, and she pulled it. What unraveled was significant. A second document surfaced found by Gerald in the archived files of Daniel's original estate attorney, a man who had retired 2 years prior and who, when contacted, said that Daniel had come to see him alone, without Renee, approximately 8 months before he died. Daniel had said he wanted to update his documents. He had said he was concerned about the future. He had named me as the beneficiary of the company shares he held 40% of my own company, which I had transferred to him 5 years earlier as part of a succession plan. He had also established a testamentary trust for the children he hoped to have one day, administered by me in the event of his death. Renee did not know this document existed. The retired attorney had not been contacted by her legal team because no one had thought to look for him. I am not a man who cries easily. I cried when Gerald read me those provisions over the phone. I cried because my son had gone to that attorney alone, without telling me, and had done what he believed was the right thing, quietly, the way he always did what he believed was right. He had known something was wrong. He had protected what he could. The hearing was on a Thursday morning in late January. I wore the same suit I had worn to Daniel's funeral because it seemed right. Patricia stood beside me, and Gerald stood behind her, and across the table, Renee sat with her attorney, and with Marcus, who had been named in the fraud proceedings Patricia had subsequently filed. The judge was a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses on a chain and a patience that I came to understand was not softness but precision. She reviewed the documents. She asked questions. Renee's attorney argued. Patricia responded. This went on for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, the judge set down her glasses and said that she found sufficient grounds to invalidate the contested will and to recognize the prior documented provisions. She also referred the matter of the fraudulent will's witnesses to the district attorney's office. Renee did not faint. I want to be accurate. But she went the color of old ash, and Marcus put his hand on the table as if he needed to steady himself, and her attorney closed his folder without looking at anyone. Patricia leaned over and said quietly, "The garage." The safe was opened 2 weeks later, under the supervision of the court. In it were 3 things: a handwritten letter from Daniel, addressed to me, a copy of the updated estate documents Gerald had already found, and a photograph of the 2 of us from the summer we drove Route 66, standing in front of a diner in Amarillo, both of us squinting into the sun. I did not read the letter in front of anyone. I took it home and I read it at my kitchen table, alone, with a cup of coffee that I actually remembered to drink while it was still warm. I will not tell you everything he wrote. Some things are not for anyone else. But I will tell you that he said he knew. He said he had known for a while. He said he was sorry he hadn't said it out loud when he had the chance, and that he loved me, and that the company should stay in the family, and that he was glad, at least that he'd had the good sense to put things in writing. He signed it with the nickname I had called him since he was 4 years old. I had not heard that nickname spoken by anyone in months. Renee and Marcus both faced criminal charges. The fraud with the will's witnesses was not a small matter once the DA's office looked at the full picture. There were other things that came out during their investigation that I had not known: financial accounts, a property in another state, patterns that had begun before Daniel was even sick. I was not involved in that process. I gave my statement, and I let the prosecutors do what prosecutors do. The company came back to me. Gerald walked me through the paperwork, and I signed where I was told to sign, and when it was done, he shook my hand and said he was glad I had called him. I told him I was glad Daniel had thought to protect what he built. I sold the house. I could not keep it. Whatever memories lived there, they did not need 4 bedrooms and a garage with a concrete seam to survive. I sold it, and I put the money into the trust Daniel had established, under my administration, for children who would not come now. I go back and forth, still, about whether I handled that right. Patricia said I handled it correctly. Gerald said I handled it correctly. At 3 in the morning, I am less certain. I kept the Johnny Cash record. I kept my grandfather's tools, which Renee had put in a box in a closet and apparently forgotten. I kept the photograph from the diner in Amarillo. Daniel's model trains the ones he spent 2 winters building when he was 14 and 15, the ones that ran on a track. He laid himself through the spare bedroom of the house we lived in. Then those I disassembled carefully and packed and carried to my daughter's house in Portland, where my granddaughter, who is now 7 and has my son's eyes, has already started asking me how they work. I drive up to Portland on the 2nd Sunday of every month. We sit on the floor of her room with the track laid out between us, and I show her how the switches work, and she asks me questions I don't always have answers to. And that is fine. That is more than fine. Some mornings I wake up and the house is quiet in the specific way. That houses are quiet when the person you built them around is gone, and I make my coffee and I stand at the window and I understand that grief is not something you finish. It is something you carry, and over time you get stronger, or the weight gets more familiar, or both. And eventually you can carry it and still do other things. Still fix gutters, still eat dinner, still drive to Portland on the 2nd Sunday of the month, and sit on the floor with a 7-year-old who wants to know how the switches work. I built something once from nothing, a truck and a phone book and 31 years of early mornings. I know how to start again. She thought she had buried me along with my son. She had forgotten that I know how to build things that last.